In this video lesson, I'm going to talk about what a bar graph is. A lesson that goes before this is the tally and frequency lesson, and that's what I have here is the tally and frequency table that I actually made with you in our previous video lesson on tally and frequency tables. I did not bring the percents column with us here because it actually doesn't matter. We don't need it for this lesson. So just as a reminder, we had three forms of data, which were red, purple, green, and I made up tallies for each of them, where the total here for red was 4, purple was 8, green is 12. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about different ways in which you can actually represent the data that you have received, but visually as opposed to using numbers. Before we actually start constructing or talking about bar graphs, I need to go over what exactly it means to make a graph. So what I've done for you here is I have created for you these lines here. We're going to call these, and I'm going to change colors for this. This here is called, and this here, these are called the axes or an axis. Axes is like the plural of axis or two axes, okay? So we have two axes. We call this one for now the vertical axis because it's going up and down, and so you can guess that we call this one the horizontal axis, okay? A bar graph or any graph really should have these two at least. And what we do with these is they represent our statistics. And in our case, it's actually going to represent the things on this table right now. So just because we're talking about it, why not? We're going to say the horizontal axis is always labeled with the data. In this case, it's our colors. Okay, so it's always labeled with the data. The vertical axis is always the numbers. So how many of each data that you have, in our case we have 4 red, 4, 8 purple, and 12 green. And the numbers will go down here. Something that isn't on this graph that we're going to add to it though that I need you to know is there's always going to be a title. You should always have a title for your graph of any kind. You should really always have a title. Of course, the title shouldn't be anything silly. It should actually be a title that will represent the data that you are trying to show. In our case, we could have something, and we'll do this in the next slide, but in our case, we'll have something to do with like our favorite colors. So I also want to talk about these axes because this axis here represents the number, and we usually call here what's called a scale. So you have to decide, what am I going to put here? What numbers am I going to even put here on this side? What would make sense for me if I'm representing these three numbers in our case? The most important thing is that your scale should go up by the same multiple. So I'm going to write here, needs to go up by the same multiple. You should know what a multiple is. In our case, though, we have a pretty good amount of numbers here. Our 4, our 8, our 12. So go up by the same multiple. You cannot decide that your scale is going to go 2, 5, 19, 24, 3,000. You know what I mean? That's wrong. That's incorrect. You cannot do that. You have to decide based on the numbers that you have in your frequency. You have to decide what would make the most sense for a scale, what I'm going to go up by. And we're going to talk about that because we're actually going to graph, of course, this tally table that I have here. So there's just some words that I need you to remember. You need to remember what the word scale means. You're going to have to know what the word axis means. And you're going to have to know which one is vertical and which one is horizontal. And you're also going to need to remember what a title is. So as we are going to make it, just remember that when I use these words, you should know what they mean, and I will be using them pretty frequently. So on this page here, I have a completely blank chart now without any words on it, and we're gonna just fill it out. So remembering here that we have down here to put our data. Now, I didn't say this in the last slide, but you should also have titles for your vertical and for your horizontal axis. Now, when I told you that this axis here has the data, our data are titled red, purple, and green. And that's actually what I'm going to write here: red, purple, green. Now, as I'm doing this, note a few things. One, I have put spaces between red, purple, and green. So important. And I'm now going to title this horizontal axis. I'm going to title this the colors. These are the colors. Now, on this side here, on our vertical axis, we're actually going to be putting in the frequency. So honestly, you can write something as easy as frequency, just so that we know what exactly this vertical axis is representing. We'll do the title of the graph at the end, just because I want to make sure that it's all organized and we have all the right room and so on. Now, we were talking earlier about scale, the scale that it's going to go up by. Now, in our case, we have some pretty amazing numbers because they are all multiples of 4. So that actually works out really well because we could go up by 4. We could also go up by 2, and that would work as well, but you choose what you want to go up by. You could even go up by 5 if you really wanted to. It's totally up to you. But I hope that you understand that it makes sense for the purpose of this table, especially with these numbers up here. It makes sense for us to just go up by 4. Because I want it to be super visual though, I'm going to actually go up by 2 and do 4, 8, and 12, just because I actually want you to see the bars on my bar graph, and it's not too smushed. And I have the space, so why not? So let's start. This is called a bar graph. So we're literally going to be making bars. And so we're, instead of like drawing, some maybe you've seen pictographs, instead of drawing pictures up to how much it is, we're going to just draw a bar. It's as simple as that. Because I can, I will color code my bars, but please don't feel like you have to. Also, please don't feel like you have to color in the bars. It is a waste of time. Just saying. So for red, we have a very simple 4. So because 4 people said red, I'm literally going to draw a bar that ends at 4, but comes up this way, right? It comes from the bottom and then it stops at 4. Now, I did tell you not to draw it, not to color it in, sorry. So I'm just going to do something like this so that everybody knows that that is red and that is where the bar is. And that's our first bar. Our next one is purple, so let me just change my color to purple here. And we have 8 purple. So I'm once again going to draw from the bottom of my axis all the way to the number. So see how it coincides with 8? So I've stopped at 8. And I'm going to just color it in here very simply without wasting any time. So that's purple. And last but not least, we do have green. So for green, we actually have 12 green. And I guess I should note that I might have made my purple box a bit bigger than my red box. Although that's not very important, because I do want everybody to be consistent, I'm actually going to make my purple box the same size as my red box. Just because I do want consistency and I also don't want you to get confused, of course. So I'm just going to make my purple box 2 squares, if you will. And now I'm going to go to green. Now, once again, we said green had 12, and I'm being consistent by keeping it 2 little squares long. And once again, I'm stopping at 12. So I'm going to color this in. And we are almost done. We are almost done. There's just one last thing that we do need to add onto our bar graph, and that is a title. And I'm just going to say our favorite colors. And that's a perfectly acceptable title, and it can go right on top of the graph. Now, before I stop this video, I do want to make note of a few things that I have that you might need as well. 1, graph paper. Graph paper is so helpful for you when you are creating any type of graph because it's graph paper. It's made for graphs. Those squares here are really, really helpful for us. The second thing that you should need when you are doing this, making any type of graph, is a ruler. It is very important. We don't really draw a lot in math, but when we do want it to be neat. And so when we are drawing anything in math, it's very, very important for you to use a ruler or whatever is going to make this a bit more aesthetically pleasing. The colors are not necessary. The ruler and the graph paper pretty much are. So if you can get a hold of that, that would be really, really great. So just to recap, we have here a bar graph, and I'm going to write that up here in case you forgot what we're doing. It's called bar graphs. And so we've created one using a frequency table. Things to remember that I'm going to highlight for us here. The axis has a title. We put in our data titles right here. These numbers here we call the scale, and in our case, we scaled by 4. We're going up by 4. The other thing, our title. You need a title for your bar graph. If you have all of these things, and of course, don't forget the bars. Don't forget the actual bars that make up the bar graph. When you have all of these things combined together properly, you are good to go in terms of creating bar graphs.